Hey everyone, today we are going to talk about connective tissue. And as you probably know, this is one of the four basic types of tissues that you find in humans. And what I want to do here in this lecture is give you a basic understanding or an overview of what this tissue is, because you will need to understand before you go and study it in a little bit more detail in classes such as histology. Now, what I want to tell you on this tissue is that it is a fibrous tissue comprised of a lot of fibers. This is what it means, fibrous tissue. The second thing that I would like to tell you is that connective tissue cells are usually separated by a material that they produce, and this material collectively is called extracellular matrix, this yellow substance that you can see here in these cells. As you can see, they are not as closely or tightly packed together as you can see in other tissues such as epithelium, because those other tissues, they are closely packed together, but in connective tissue, cells are surrounded by this extracellular matrix. The third thing I would like to tell you about connective tissue is the basic functions of this tissue is to support and bind other tissues together in your body. Now it is time to talk about the characteristics or the features of this tissue, connective tissue. And one of the things that you really need to understand about this is that every time we talk about a tissue, you know that you're talking about an aggregate or a group of cells that function towards the same purpose. And of course, then you will see cells hanging around connective tissue. Now, there is a special characteristic, one thing that defines this type of tissue, and the fact that these cells here are surrounded by fibers. And depending on what type of connective tissue that you're looking at, you will see different types of fibers. And I have two examples here, collagen and elastin, but you can see other types as well. And another thing that you will see surrounding cells is ground substance. And ground substance is a gel-like material, also known as amorphous material, or no shape, with no defined shape. And this material, or this substance, is comprised of these molecules with long names. One of them is glycosaminoglycans, proteoglycans, and glycoproteins. Now these two, the fibers and the ground substance, they constitute something that I already talked about called extracellular matrix. And this is the space surrounding the cells. So this is the main characteristics of connective tissue. And it doesn't matter which one you're looking at, you are going to see cells surrounded by an extracellular matrix. Now, the characteristics will vary, or the fibers will vary, and the type of ground substance as well, depending on which one you're looking. Now, the last thing that you need to know about connective tissue, the characteristics of connective tissue, is that you will sometimes see some fluid in some of the types of connective tissue out there. And one example is blood. As you know, blood has cells, different types of cells that are surrounded by an extracellular matrix, let's say, but most of it is, of course, fluid. So it is important to refer that some of these tissues, some of the connective tissues out there, they are surrounded by some fluid. Every time I talk about connective tissue, I talk about the tissue in your body that works or functions to provide structure, or even is used to bind other types of tissues together. But what I want to do here is tell you the way you subclassify this type of tissue. And there are many types of tissue, connective tissue in your body, and the way that you classify these types of tissue, or subclassify as you wish, depends not only on the types of cells, but also and most importantly in the composition and organization of this thing called extracellular matrix, or the material surrounding the cells of the connective tissue. And I have an example here that illustrates clearly what I'm just talking about. I have here two types of connective tissue that are extremely different from one another. One is blood and the other one is bone. Now, if I have to compare these two, one versus the other, the main difference here, of course, are the cells, but another big difference between these two connective tissues is, of course, the extracellular matrix. In blood, it's going to be plasma. The cells are surrounded by plasma. And in bone, they are surrounded by collagen fibers. So collagen and calcium. So as you can see, these are the ways that we classify or subclassify other types of connective tissue found in your body. On this slide, I want to show some examples of the major physical structures that are composed of connective tissue. And if you look here, I have tendons, blood, cartilage, bone, adipose tissue, in other words, fat tissue, and lymphatic tissue. These are all structures that are either connective tissue or comprised of connective tissue. Now, after you look at these structures, you can start guessing the functions of connective tissue. And I have here the main ones. Of course, you can add a couple more. But the main ones are clearly support, if you think about bones and cartilage. Defense, if you look at blood, or the functions of blood, and lymphatic tissue, which have properties that can protect your body. And transport, also if you think about blood, which carries nutrients and water, oxygen, anything that needs to be carried around or transported around your body is going to be done through blood, which is a connective tissue. Storage, if you think about adipose tissue, which is a fat tissue, and meaning that energy will be stored here in the form of fat. So an example of storage and how connective tissue has it as a function. Now the last one, repair. If you talk about different repair mechanisms that happen in your body, it is clearly carried by connective tissue or done by connective tissue. If you look at blood, for example, has repair mechanisms in wounds, for example. Platelets rings a bell. Well, we're talking about connective tissue here as well. So these are just to give you an idea of where you can find connective tissue in your body and the functions associated to them. Of course, I could do many lectures talking about the many types of connective tissues that are out there, but I chose to just briefly discuss a couple of types which I believe are very important. And these types are usually associated or near epithelium. If you have a question or a doubt about epithelium, what is epithelium, I suggest you look at the lecture that I have here available on Salmonella Place on epithelium. And this is the tissue that usually covers or lines surfaces or lines organs or cavities. And what I need to show you here is that this is going to be the epithelium on my figure here, on my illustration, and I should have a surface here, or the outer environment. Right underlining my epithelium, I usually find a type of connective tissue which I would like to discuss, and this is loose connective tissue. And going inwards to the inside, I'm going to find another type that I would like to briefly talk about, which is called dense connective tissue. I would like to give you some words on loose connective tissue, on this type of tissue. And if I use here my illustration, my image that I explained in the previous slide, but I have here a surface, say a surface of an organ, or the outer environment. And the first layer that I'm going to encounter is usually epithelium, another type of tissue which covers surfaces of organs, for example. The tissue or the layer right after and going inwards, say I'm moving inwards towards the inside of the organ, the first layer that I'm going to find right after epithelium is loose connective tissue, which we are going to discuss briefly here. Now, as I mentioned already, the first thing is this is where, or loose connective tissue is where most epithelia rests upon. The second thing that you need to know about loose connective tissue, the extracellular matrix, which is the material surrounding the cells here on the loose connective tissue, contains collagen fibers. And you will find a great number of cells in loose connective tissue, so keep that in mind. Now, the cells that you find are called fibroblasts. And these cells are able to form and maintain the extracellular matrix. And as the name indicates, fibro, from fiber, they are going to produce the fibers that constitute or that comprise the extracellular matrix. Another type of cells that you will find in loose connective tissue are called migrant cells. And as the name indicates, these are cells that do not last for too long here in this area, in the loose connective tissue. So they are here, they perform what they have to do, and then they leave. And these cells have roles associated with the immune system. So this is the last slide of this lecture where I'm going to give you a couple words on this type of tissue, dense connective tissue. And as I mentioned, this is my epithelium here near the surface. Going inwards, I have loose connective tissue, and even further in, I will have dense connective tissue. So this is the tissue that you can see here just right after loose connective tissue, and the characteristics, just briefly talking about this type of tissue, what you need to know for now is that it lies in areas where strength is required, and for this reason you will find here more collagen fibers and they are more densely packed. Another thing that you need to know about dense connective tissue is that these cells are separated and limited by the fiber forming cells, also known as fibroblasts, and these are the cells that form the fibers. So this is the overview that I wanted to give you on connective tissue, and later we will post lectures in more detail about this tissue.